Let's try to define entropy, because I think it connects to so many fundamental concepts from our understanding of the world. I've seen that entropy is the increase in disorder. That's like the mainstream definition that people give to it, but there's more to it than just disorder. I think that the more fundamental definition of entropy that I've come to is that there's a range of possibilities, and there's a distribution of what is more probable and what is less probable. And the falling towards the more probable is what ends up making entropy increase. Not only, so the range of possibilities is determined by space and time. So the line of time is defined by a ratio between things happening. So time, we define it as how many times something happens while something else is happening. That's the most fundamental definition of time we have. We don't have anything else. That is like how the standard units are defined. And then space is required so that we can distribute across it the things that are going on. So if we are having a system which is ordered by the cause and effect rules, then if you have a coffee and you throw it in the floor, it will spread. So it will take more space, and the range of possibilities that are taken now are more. And I think that the definition of entropy that I really like is this one, that entropy is the unidirectional movement towards being able to do less with what you have, because the substrate with which you were able to do things, which is the energy you had access to, is now distributed across more space. So that is how I would start thinking about entropy. And later on, we could connect entropy to other concepts, fundamental also to physics. But that's more or less where I start thinking of. How do you see it?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Space-time, yes.
Mm-hmm. I think that there's some disagreement, or I don't know if there's disagreement between you and I, because I haven't been able to go deep enough into what our positions are, or even I don't know if I have a solid position in relation to this topic. But I believe that entropy will keep increasing. That's all the evidence that we have. Or there seems to be a difference between the local and the less local. You can make if you take a picture of something from very close and you take another one from farther, you can see that you can decrease the entropy locally by heating it up or doing something to it that will, in the way we define entropy, decrease it, but in a more global way, which it will never be absolute, given that you cannot conceive of the whole thing. It has to irradiate outside some entropy, and so you will make the outside colder, so that you were making the inside hotter, or the density of the matter will have to be decreased outside of it, so that you can increase the inside, and that's so it has there seems to be a zero-sum game in terms of how much matter and energy we're dealing with in the universe, and matter and energy are also equated thanks to the famous equation from Einstein. E equals mc squared, that matter and energy are the same thing. So with most of the topics in physics that we are talking about, they have a huge overlap between them. And I think that entropy connects a lot of them, and being able to understand this at the deep level would collapse so many of the concepts that would habilitate more agile thinking of how the universe works. If you are renaming the same concept with different tools and different methods, then you will not be able to move through how the world works as fast as you could have, were you to do a one-to-one map between the words that you use and the features of the universe. And that's also why I'm a big critic of synonyms and polynonyms, that when you have multiple words for one concept and multiple concepts for one word, that destroys the one-to-one parity between our model and the universe. So I don't like that. I like to have one thing for one word or one model for one thing, and if it stops working, then we can modify it. But if you have multiple words for one thing, you're just masturbating your mind. This is somewhat of an off-topic offshoot of this conversation, but I would like to hear more on your hypothesis that there's a deep epistemological bankruptcy, that the models we build about how the universe works can never be 100% right. And I agree with you, they will never be. Knowledge is provisional. That's the ethos of the scientific method, that we always need to revise our hypothesis. Every piece of evidence we've gathered until the moment is subject to future disprovement. So everything can be disproved with further evidence, right?
Yes. Yes, but interestingly, I heard in your approach an overriding concept about simplification and the arrival at a single model, the tolerance of more than one model. That to you I clearly heard was some sort of deviation from an optimal path. That the goal should always be to make one model, and already there. I'm seeing how that could slow you down. I mean, everybody talks about agile. We've on previous occasions talked about agile, the two of us, and what agile says is that there's at various points along the way you're allowed to change. You're allowed to drop the model and or merge the model with others, and that actually that speeds things up enormously. Mm-hmm. So here again, I could hear in your thinking that your most fundamental aspect of your approach was this ruthless simplification, which is itself, for me, that speaks to a sort of a longing for a knowledge of an overriding truth.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it.
And so already, and you and I have had lots of discussions where we've tried to find a point of departure here. Already on this latest departure, I can see how that thinking is quasi-religious. It's that longing for a view from above. And so I'm intrigued at how quickly I can find evidence of that thinking in even, as it were, your most consolidated points of departure. Mm-hmm. It fascinates me, right? Very intelligent person that you are, and yet it's so easy for me to, each time round, see your longing appeal for capital T truth. That for me is just the fundamental first step misstep.
I would disagree with that. I think there's no alternative to building models. And I want to back my claim with whatever you can conceive of as evidence. Whenever you are making a claim about something, which you're now making about the wrongness of what I'm talking about, you have to be building that hypothesis or that position or that description of how the universe works with something you've previously seen. So there's an observation and then there's a description of how it works, and you're making a hypothesis of how it works. And then, so your claim seems to, you seem to claim that your criticism goes one layer deeper in saying that there's no hypothesis. It's the hypothesis that there's no hypothesis. But I don't see how your understanding of how the universe works can get away from building a model of how things work. If you're not describing the cause and effect mechanism behind how something works, you're not talking of anything. I think there's no alternative, and I'm not being able to phrase this correctly, but it's an analogy I could bring in running, for example. If you're trying to move across the landscape of that you can move through, there's the X and Y axis. You move forward, you can move laterally. Those two dimensions are habilitated to you. And you seem to want to go into the y-axis, go up. But I don't see how you can, in the realm of moving through the landscape of running, go up. You seem to want to bring in another dimension through which we can move and discard the model building way of understanding how the universe works. And I haven't been able to understand how you can discard that meta model and say there's a way of not building a model which can be pursued, and that's in itself a model for me. I don't see how you can get away from building a model. So you discarding my models to understand how everything works is itself another model.
I think you need to make a distinction in this dialogue so far between my claim that I've got a better model than yours, and the claim that I do believe I'm making is that I'm trying to clear away a part of yours. I mean, it's simply not true that I've asserted a superior model. Actually, all I've done is something rather destructive, which is to take part of your model and ask you to cast it aside. And importantly, not from any feeling that there's a deeper level of understanding that I have compared to yours. Not at all. But more of an empirical process that says that I acknowledge that I don't know the overriding truth, and that any journey that begins with, I think I'll have this truth about zero-sum games, that being the key phrase that we've, again, arrived at in our discussion, that is a model. You are evoking a model, a piece of mathematics in zero-sum. And it's precisely that I don't believe that the world is, in essence, one way or the other, whether it's zero-sum or otherwise. I'm just saying that already I see parts that are wrong, right? In other words, that there is you are expressing a feature of your model that can already be empirically rejected. It's very easy to reject empirically claims of zero sum, because really life's leaps and bounds are all about non-zero sum games. So it seems to me that having a zero sum model as an overarching approach, and you do, that having that overarching approach is not going to be your friend.
As I told you before, I'm a critique of the mismatch between the one-to-one mapping of words to concepts in the world. So if we have multiple words for one concept, that's inefficient. And if we have multiple concepts for one word, that's inefficient. So polynonyms and synonyms are inefficient, in my opinion. There could be many poets or artistic people who would argue otherwise, but from a strictly scientific perspective of trying to map the world as efficiently as we can, as long as we don't find a mismatch between what we're talking about and the model we build, then there's no need to have multiple words. And maybe there's a case to be made that if you have multiple words for one thing, the different connotations would allow you to get more of the meaning of the world, as in you have a normal distribution of what you're making reference to. And if you have a single word that everyone has to understand what it means, if you have multiple words for it, you can make reference to the tails as well. And maybe in some occasions, some people would make reference to those things with different words. So as in trying to get to the target, you throw multiple darts at it, and some of them will get to the sides. But anyway, I was just trying to make my claim that we want to understand what entropy is. And the way to do this is to polish our models of how the universe works. And you seem to have a very revolutionary way of understanding this, in my view, that the building of models is bankrupt, epistemologically, as I like to say it. And I haven't been able to understand why you say this. But so let me give you some background in how I see entropy and how I think that we conclude that entropy only increases. So the most fundamental way of defining entropy that I can think of is that before we used to be able to do certain things that now we cannot. So once you've done something, that possibility stops being on the table. Among the range of possibilities that we had, some of them are not anymore there. And some others will be now that weren't before, because we took a path that allowed us to take steps towards one direction. But if you were 5, you could become many more people than if you are 60, because there's more room to move through. And entropy and time are more or less the same time, because the way we define time is as a ratio of things happening. So how many times does this thing fluctuate? Or how many times can this Celsius atom decay while we do this? That's how we measure time. That's the fundamental measurement. And there seems to be a line of time determined by how many things we could do in the past and how many things we could do in the past, in the future. And as time goes on, we can do fewer things because we have less access to matter and energy because things seem to be distributing across space. And this is the other dimension that I think is also fundamental: space. The range of possibilities distribute themselves across space. So if you throw a cube, or if you throw your coffee in the floor, it distributes across the space, and the range of possibilities taken by the coffee now are more than previously. Obviously, if you define the location of every single atom, then you could express the system with the equal amount of information than before, because it's just the same atoms in a different distribution. But if you have coffee and milk and you mix them, it's very easy to go towards the homogeneous mixture, but you never go in the opposite direction. And there seems to be something fundamental driving that movement in one direction. And going deep into why this is the case would be very revelatory, and I would like to hear your thoughts on what entropy is and whether you disagree with it.
Okay, so as we've discussed previously, and as you agree, the overall picture is that things go in one direction only. The overall picture is that we have a zero-sum game, and so on. But there are also, life is about the local, proximal deviations from that. We go about building things. That's what we do. We do it well. Some of us spend a lot of time, even before we take an action, to try and make sure that we premeditate actions and think about and believe that we've got ideas about how to behave optimally in the world. But we build, and those builds, those activities, and the results of those actions in our local frame are to simply reverse the global trend of entropy. We create local order, and while we accept that creation of local order does not disturb the global decay, entropic decay, because there are inefficiencies in that action, we do achieve that. So for me, all of the interesting stuff takes place in moving in the opposite direction from entropy. And even that part, I'm sure that you would agree that life happens by way of reversing this global trend. The things that we consider interesting and that we cherish in life are struggles in the opposite direction from this relentless entropic path to hell. Okay, and so what we're really doing is developing our premeditations, our actions before, our thoughts before action that will optimize that constructive process. That's how I see the world. I see that we're trying to hack our way through, developing life hacks in life day by day that help us reverse that global trend and make a pretty sandcastle in our immediate environment. And where I think we differ is that I'm very much focused on that speculative empirical process. What happens when I add the green Lego block on top of the yellow one, and does the castle stand tall? My focus is on that experimentation and taking pleasure in the joy that it brings. And yet you will typically open a discussion by wanting to say that it is, of course, at a global level, pointless, that what's all of that speculation, that we just want to have a simple model and apply it, a zero-sum game framework. And I really do see a very big difference between those two projects. One is constructive, speculative, opportunistic with the rules, and yours is, and this is why I keep on throwing this sort of strong, more or less simply a provocation, that it's a religious view that our first point of departure should be to accept that entropy goes in one direction and to accept that there is a path towards an ever more perfect model to take action. And that's how I see that we are different.
Okay. But would you agree with me that there's a Big Bang and a heat death towards... So we came from a Big Bang and we are going towards a heat death. And that's inexorable. There's no exceptions. The step to moving towards that will go step by step. And no matter what you do, if you wait long enough, all of the atoms in your body will decay into almost nothing. And none of them will interact with each other anymore. If you just wait enough, 10 to the 200th power years, that's the time frame on which this is speculated to occur. Would you disprove that?
I agree theoretically in that.
Okay.
So I think that the mathematics show that, because the observations that we've made so far agree with that idea. And as we are observation-driven creatures, we ought to be satisfied with that as a theoretical explanation of what happens.
Okay, so until now, we haven't gathered any piece of data which could contradict this. There's a heat, there's a Big Bang behind us, and there's a heat death before us. But in between, that's where life can emerge. Between no entropy and absolute entropy is that life can emerge and can reverse it locally.
Yes.
This is I saw a video from Kurzgesagt, and they talked about coffee and milk mixing, and I really liked that they talked about how the heat death of the universe is inevitable, but it's in the point in which you're dropping the coffee into the milk that when the mixture is occurring, when it's not perfectly homogeneous, that it's the moment in which beautiful patterns appear. And I think that life is that. Life is precisely a pattern of matter that can replicate itself. The replication is not perfect. It leaves room to natural selection to occur, random variation, non-random selection. That's what leads to fitness to keep being high enough for that ever-modifying pattern to be capable of replicating itself.
I'm interested that you evoked this idea of the fleeting beauty of the pattern of the milk before it mixed.
Yeah.
It already has a sort of an emotional... in so much that you define it as a fleeting moment, you're already mentally in a world in which that moment has passed. In the as it were, the sadness that this early structure in the physical movement of milk within a volume of coffee, that this early structure is fleeting, which it is, but that your perspective is looking back, like a sort of a melancholic feel that it will inevitably turn into this heat death thing, and that it'll be all mixed in, and that the beauty of that pattern will be lost. And so yet again, I'm wanting to evoke that you're living within this perfect model. You're imagining this perfect model. Your perspective is from the perfect sort of overall end state, which is not empirical. I mean, realize that as you observe that fleeting beauty of a pattern of milk dispersing within a volume of hot coffee, realize that at that moment, that is the empirically observed universe. Why is it that you're already, in your description of it, looking back at it from as it were, a higher level or later level, infinitely later level, in which that beauty will be lost to an entropic homogeneity between milk and black coffee? Why is that?
That's human action. The market is the agglomeration of multiple humans making their own decisions based on their judgments. And then price is the best source of signal to noise ratio. You don't have to know how much oil is left. If the price goes up, you might change your behavior. So human action agglomerated in the market makes the market able to be a prediction machine. It's a machine of anticipation. If you know that something is going to happen, and that's certain enough, the market behaves as if that already occurred. So if you know that the CEO of your company is going to be shot tomorrow at 12 a.m., then the price of the stock goes down now, because everyone is expecting someone to sell the stock in the future. So why not do it now to anticipate the gains or the losses? So whatever our ability to predict the future is, our way of behaving, and we'll put ourselves as far as we can with a certain level of certainty predict. So I think it has something to do with how markets work and how human action, that we want, if something is certain to occur, then we position ourselves after that. And then doing this at the biggest of the scales possible seems ridiculous because, well, where else can I position myself apart from inside of the system that we are analyzing? And I'm trying to position myself outside of it. And it's absurd because I cannot put myself after the heat of the universe. And you're right, I'm anticipating something that I think is certain to occur. So I'm just extrapolating to infinity the small pattern that I've seen occur between humans. That if you know that your CEO is going to be shot, the value of the company is lower now.
So you evoked a framework of the market and knowledge, imperfect or otherwise, about the market and how you would participate in such a market. In other words, you would be trying to make a prediction and act upon that prediction so as to, and let's be clear, your main strategy there was not as an investor, but as a shorter. You were going to short the stock. If your model predicted the assassination of the CEO tomorrow at 12 o'clock, then your action is not. Your action is based around a shorting strategy, which is to de-risk your investment in that stock. And in my metaphor, it should always be that it's very interesting to make such speculations, but it's always good to hedge risk and to have strategies as part of your work as an investor to hedge risks and to in this case it would be to short the stock. But the other process in investment is the creation of portfolios, which involves an accretive process rather than a shorting process. It involves which stock to buy. I mean, that's how people actually accumulate wealth. They hold portfolios that have value, and that shorting is part of a risk strategy rather than an investment strategy per se. And I think it's worth mentioning at that point, when you first said that's the market, metaphorically with the coffee, the market is eventually, it will be a homogeneous pot of milky coffee. In the market, in the market proper, it was that there could be an event that you anticipate and that you want to short it. But there's just a whole other way of doing things that's more on the constructive side. And I'm reminded on that constructive side, that portfolio building side, that there's another very important feature of the market, which is that the market is composed of two sorts of participants: market makers and the rest. And that we all know that within sophisticated financial markets, all of the action is around the dealer banks, the market makers, the people whose holdings of primary minerals and so on. It's the market makers that are setting the price, rather than the uncertainty around whether the CEO gets assassinated or whether the ship containing the commodities will get blocked in the Suez Canal. And that's a really important thing that I was immediately able to throw back at you. That if we wanted to talk about a sophisticated market, then your strategy, which, coming back, I'm wanting to look at the zero-sum sort of part of it. Your strategy was not sophisticated. It ignored the fact that markets function because of market makers who are actively driving the price around independently of the uncertainties. So I was able to say, as you drifted in the direction of the market metaphor, that your approach was not as of a sophisticated market. It was exactly of a sort of someone that of course doesn't know what happens tomorrow, but that can make a bet and would be able to hedge their losses by shorting the stock. But that's such a different activity from the one that I think is so important.
I don't see a difference there. Shorting and investing, I think, are the same thing. Because when you're shorting, you are disallocating capital somewhere and you're putting it somewhere else. Capital cannot be not invested. You either hold it in the form of money or any form of other money that doesn't have to be fiat. It can be gold, Bitcoin, whatever form of storage of your wealth you want to store it in, you can do that, or stock. So if you want to put your capital somewhere, you have to take it from somewhere else. And so that process always requires you to short something. And as the allocation of the capital leads to more abundance of what we care about, that's the process of becoming rich. If you're investing in places where companies are adding value, then you will become richer. That's the value that good investors make. If you're giving the ability of people, good managers, to manage more things, then they will be able, they increase their leverage, their actions have more repercussions in the world, and that makes them able to produce more good. And you take the money or the capital out of the people who are managing it wrongly. That's what a good investor would do. And I swerved into how the market works as an analogy to how I was trying to behave or explain that the universe was eventually going to go into the heat death. In that anticipation of what you expect to be the future is a fundamental part of reality. Every living being makes constant predictions of how the world works. Actually, this is part of our neuronal wiring. There's like 10 times more neurons going from the bottom of the hierarchy, from our senses, to the top. So the direction of the neural wiring is 10 times more dense from our toes or our hands to our brain than from our brain to our hands. So the bottom-up feedback is 10 times more than the top-down one. So the process of saying what you have to do is 10 times, or I don't know, maybe the ratio is another one. This is some research I checked a while ago. I might be completely wrong on the numbers, but the directionality of the magnitude is more or less correct. That as you grab a bottle, you are making a prediction that the bottle will be there. And if it fails, then there's feedback coming from the hand telling you that actually what you were predicting is not there. And so you have to recast your model. You have to change how you thought about the world and think about something else to be able to make sense of what you were doing. And then until you make a prediction that matches the evidence you're gathering, you will constantly be trying to anticipate what will happen now. And you're modifying your models constantly. So where I was trying to go with this is that I don't see an alternative to making predictions of how the world works. And the prediction that I was trying to make, that the universe will eventually go into the heat death, is the ultimate one. There's no other prediction that you can make, because this is the biggest time frame on which we can think of, and the discovery of the eventual heat death of the universe was made a few decades ago by brilliant physicists. So this is nothing new. I'm not adding any knowledge to the epistemology of humans, but I don't see how you can get away from this way of thinking. You can never stop anticipating the future. The way you saw the past makes you be able to build a model with which to react to the future environment. The past environment endowed you with an ability to deal with the environment, and now you can deal with your future environment. And the degree to which it matches is the degree to which you will be fit.
So fitness is an interesting way that we could continue. I could take that as a new anchor point. Fitness, and a model that is fit to anticipate the events that take place from now on and help you to be in the right place at the right time. Well, what is it that we do as a species and that defines us is that we seek to dispel uncertainty and replace it with control. We try to create these islands of the islands where we have, through our own constructions, whether it's a traffic light at an intersection of cars or a university that builds our knowledge, that we create these rules and people that follow them that actually just manage that risk without having to hedge them anymore. We build things to remove those risks so that we're not permanently reactive and having to spend so much of our time concerning those risks and hedging against them. We can now go camping on a nice summer day in a pair of shorts, because we know that if a bear does rush out, we can shoot it with a rifle. We impose our control on the environment, and that's what affords us so much of the freedoms that we really enjoy. It's through our control. Now, of course, the shooting a bear is a bit of a loaded sort of concept because you're destroying nature, but it already goes to where we definitely want to go as a species, which is, rather than being ultimately predictive, we really choose control. We don't want to be the sheep. We want to be the shepherd. We don't want to be the day trader. We want to be the market maker. And so that's our magic, and that's a making process. It'll of course, market makers, there are regions that they know are outside of their control, and they will hedge against those. But how are they making their money? Through clever hedges? Are you kidding? They are making their money because they have a control over the environment. They have a way of corralling the value of prices through their own direct actions. They build. And that's the Spinozan project.
This is an interesting point. I think it touches into free will. Maybe a bit indirectly, but so I think that the analogy between shepherds and sheep is wrong, because the sheep are not in control of what happens. I agree with you. But the shepherd didn't chose. So there's a range of possibilities that the shepherd chooses where the sheep will go, but the shepherd didn't choose to have the ability to direct the sheep. There's an environment from which you're building that you yourself didn't choose. There's always something that was given to you, and you had nothing to do with its existence. That's by definition. It's always there. There's no exceptions, or I haven't seen one. So given that you're always building from something that was already there, and you haven't been able to modify it because it was just given to you, you will always be subject to understanding how the universe works in some way to be able to keep doing the thing that was given to you. So I didn't choose to be born, but my parents made me, and now I'm here. So I try to, maybe I will keep the generations one step more, and we'll find a wife at some point and maybe have some children. It was just take the...
You don't have to marry, just saying, but go on.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you don't have to, but I was just trying to make the case that the passing of the pattern of life to the next generation, that's something that has been given to me, and maybe I will give it to the next one. And where I was trying to go with this is that the free will debate underlies entropy. Exactly where we were touching. And this is incredibly difficult for me to phrase correctly, but I will try. The notion of free will doesn't make sense at all to me. How can you be exempt from cause and effect? The relationship at the level of society, that some people choose some things and others don't, and others are just subject to those decisions, can be true. So you're right. Some people chose for the laws of my city to be in some way, and I had nothing to do with it, and I'm subject to them. And if I violate them, the police will imprison me or will give me a fine. And in that dimension, you're right. But there's others in which I am free. I could move to some other city if I don't agree with this, or there's a range of possibilities which could take the ability of others to dictate over me. So there's a way of taking power or control over certain things. But the people who did the laws and were given the ability to write them were not themselves responsible for that process. Or maybe if you have to go one step farther and say, whatever was there, they didn't, as I didn't choose to exist, they didn't choose to exist, so situation that they were put into, that preceded their getting into power, wasn't chosen by them. And that's always the case. So how can you claim that there's a distinction between the people who have the control and don't have it, when no one has control over the thing that precedes the apparent control?
Because at any one moment, the first action of those that succeed through power and control, at any one moment in time, they do consider the previous events to be irrelevant and outside of their control, but they critically seize upon a building process that they believe, and they do it empirically. They read the newspaper and work out which city to move to, for example. So if they've really decided that they want to short their own city by leaving it because it doesn't offer the sort of opportunities that they believe can be found elsewhere, they will investigate. I mean, it's more than just a short. Free will is more than just a short. Free will is taking in evidence and reading the newspaper and finding out that Zurich's the place to be, most likely compared to nearly every other place that you might be or be from. And we're both foreigners here, so this reflects a sort of building process that we've taken on here. I'm still actually a little bit uncertain where free will came into it, because, I mean, we know on the one hand that at some certain physical level, free will it doesn't seem to be belong to the physics. Free will, I mean, causation is the thing that rules, and that the outcome is determined by causes rather than what people call will, right? Which is that we understand that there are fundamental causes of things, and that the wills will either align with them or not align with them, but that we don't have free will, right? In the sense that we can't determine through our will what happens in the future. We can only take good bets and build good things. So that I mean, the concept of free will has been a real. It's been a very distracting concept, and people like Dennett seized upon that distracting concept and really wanted to change people's view of free will, because so that it was just all too simple to say that the people that believe in free will are the people that deny causation. That was the advance that Dennett made. He said, listen, I mean, of course, there's an aspect of our ideation around free will that denies causation and that is, as it were, incompatible with it. But why is that such a big deal here? Because there are, of course, things that are uncertain to every constituent participant in a system, and that there are people that take consistently good bets, building up their own wisdom and having their own hunches. So to distract ourselves about whether that action is made freely, somehow outside the line of causation or not, this is merely a distraction. Free will hasn't been a helpful tool for us to explore action. That's really fundamental, because, there's been a whole group all along that have wanted us to answer that question. Does free will contradict causation? And yet, clearly, people are born, live their life, have great lives or unpleasant lives, and die quite independently of whether that question was answered. It can't have anything to do with the good stuff.
I think causation is not the solid rock on which this should be built, because obviously it is there and will always be there, and I don't see how it could be discarded. But the debate on free will has something to do with the realm of possibilities that you had. And so among the possibilities that you had, why you chose one is also not subject to your decision. So let's say I choose the white shoes instead of the black shoes today. Why was I in a condition to choose the white ones instead of the black ones? Well, I didn't choose that. That was just given to me. So if you keep doing a deeper analysis on the conditions under which a decision was made, you realize that there's cause and effect underlying everything. But the freedom from what? You can be free from many things. And that's exactly what I've been trying to escape from in my pursuit of a better place to live in, by because of my disagreement with the political system where I come from, I was just like, I don't feel like paying 50% taxes to the government. I think this is an inefficient allocation of capital, and because of the inefficient allocation of capital, salaries are much lower, which is a sweet coincidence that my political leanings correlate hugely with flourishing. But okay, this is a sweet coincidence, and I maybe shouldn't use it to back my claims, but it's the ultimate claim that you should make to back your economic hypothesis. But so freedom from what? What are you free from? And there's multiple levels of freedom. So one of them would be, why are libertarians so obsessed with individual freedom? So in freedom from coercion or violence. There's certain patterns of behavior that if we avoid, people seem to flourish more. And this is the essence of the process of accumulating useful knowledge that leads to better or worse lives. And if it's not our movement through the landscape of possible ideas that determines something worth of being done, what is? So if we can build a model of how to behave, and if we allow violence to exist, people will live tribally and be poor. But if we monopolize the violence in the state, and we prohibit everyone from using it against each other, and we have democracy in which that is given to the state, or maybe in an anarcho-capitalist system, the property could be, the provision of defense could be privatized. I don't know about that, but maybe it could be the case. So there's a certain level of analysis at which violence should be avoided. Between individuals, violence shouldn't exist, and if there's an arbiter, an independent arbiter who could say whether the conflict that emerged between us should be solved in one direction or the other, that tends to be more rational or better than if we solve it at our level of analysis. So what are we free from when you say that people shouldn't aggress each other? We're free from something, and that is violence from other people, other individuals. And if that freedom exists, we have empirical evidence to claim that people live in a more flourishing way. So it's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that there's a huge correlation between the economic freedom index and every variable we can conceive of. Even inequality is less in the more economically free countries because there's more opportunities for everyone. And entropy here is a complicated thing to tie into. And I don't know if we are confusing levels of analysis, because now we're talking about economics, and in entropy we're talking about physics, but there has to be a way of connecting these two levels of analysis that would allow us to have a consilient understanding of how the universe works. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, so just to say, I agree with the political positions that you're outlining. The critical thing is to determine what your freedom has resisted and has successfully resisted and overcome. So on all of that, we agree, but we keep on locking horns on as it were the mental orientation that would have us start making steps and doing things in that context. And yours is one to for example, model the impact of taxation just as an overriding concept, like a simplification, a useful simplification that would help us make choices about which city to live in. And again, I feel that instinct in your thinking to ruthlessly, relentlessly, and in my view, oversimplify the approach. For example, I can tell you that just as a thing to remind you that there are certain parts of the taxation system of Switzerland, very specifically the taxation of labor, that are insanely high, that make Switzerland look exactly like any other European country that is more typically associated with, economic backwardness. So tax hasn't been a very informative framework in order for me to optimize my choice to come here. It just hasn't. I mean, what optimized my choice around coming here was the abundance of other people with whom I could share ideas and build things. That was the big thing that enabled me to have that that has been the predictor of the economic successes I've had. And indeed, poignantly, all of the economic failures that I've had here as an entrepreneur, they have been through not an unexpected tax bill, but simply the lack of finding the right people to interact with, the right clever people that are wanting to actually build something with me, and that we have enough, as it were, shared vision and capacity to cohere together. Mm-hmm. So again, I found myself in a position seeing a part of your thinking, a model part of the thinking, that I could really empirically show you that they certainly had nothing to do with my flourishing.
Okay. It might have more to do with the certainty you have of how things will occur. So if you know that if you earn a certain amount of money, you will have to pay X amount of money to the government, and the rules are clearly stated, there's less things that you have to think about. And that's a hidden tax. There's the tax of the percentage that you should pay, and if you don't, you go to prison. But there's also the meta tax that is, you have to think of how to pay the tax. And if the easier the rules are stated, the less that tax exists.
But that was the easy part, Alex. That was the easiest part. The thing that actually gets me exercised, and the thing that I have to invest my effort in and evoke my emotional resilience against the ups and downs of, the thing that the activity that I've done didn't have to do with a simple strategy around the tax bill and the unexpectedly high tax bill. It was all about the constructive process. Again, the metaphor of the short versus the portfolio creation. I devoted very little attention to the short. And the more I learned about what I was shorting by coming here by way of taxation, the more I learned that was even a false view. Tax on capital here is very low. Tax on earnings is very low. Tax on labor here, I feel like I'm in the gulag. So the more I learned, the less informative that instinct, that simplification would have told me, which is sort of the point I'm trying to make here. The only thing that got things working was my capacity to connect with others, to use was rather on the portfolio selection, the buy rather than the short, and finding people that were willing to find a pack to run in, Mm-hmm. And that doesn't sound at all like an exercise of relentless simplification and rule governed. It doesn't seem to be a process around risk management. I mean, of course, there's the element that I would try to choose people that weren't risky, so exploitative or illegal people. Incidentally, the greatest success I've had has been with a person whose morals I absolutely don't trust. I mean, I can almost trust them to be the big bad wolf, right? However, they were the right person to gear up with a set of ideas and run as a pack with. So any kind of attempt to risk manage my way of selecting the strongest partner I had in the largest corporation I've worked for the longest single stint of work, of contractual work that I've done in my life, if I'd been risk managed, this person would have been off, not part of my choosing, and none of it would have happened.
Let me push back on that. I think everything is about simplification, and our flourishing depends on how many things we've been able to simplify. So the process of producing a laptop wasn't discovered by me or was manufactured by me. There's the division of labor. Every single economic lesson I've learned is more or less pointing in the same direction. That as we simplify the amount of things that people have to think through, they can put their thinking into productive things that haven't yet been solved. So we already know how to construct a laptop. You don't have to discover it by your own. And if you did, you would do a pathetic job at it, because it's the collection of knowledge by thousands of people through thousands of instances. And it's an amazing manufacturer of engineering and talent that you're not gonna supersede now from your room. It's just ridiculous. So the division of labor that leads people to do their thing in a very good way. It simplifies the process. I don't have to think of how a laptop was made. I can just buy it, and I can specialize in doing some other thing, which would add presumably as the same amount of value to the person who's producing the laptop, so that they would be willing to exchange it with me. So it is. I think everything is about simplifying, and the simplification of things is dependent on how reliable the thing you're building on is. If it is not reliable, if we didn't understand how a laptop works, we wouldn't be able to replicate the system and keep it working across countries and decades. But we do. So we have the empirical evidence that we know how to construct a laptop and how it works. I don't know how it works, but some people in society do. And as long as that number is high enough, we will keep enjoying it. And the same thing applies to every single object that we enjoy in our life. Do I know how to maintain a railroad? I don't, but some other people do, and I pay my monthly ticket, and then I can move through it, and they seem to be happy with the exchange. So, but they don't have to think about how to construct a laptop again, because some other people are doing that. So as long as people are able to specialize in something and reduce the bandwidth that they have to process, everything seems to improve. And so as you automate things, you become richer, because if you have a combined harvester, you're much more productive than if you are harvesting things by hand, right? You can do more things, you have access to more energy, and there's more square meters through which you can go through per second. And that's what leads to flourishing. So you have more productivity, more access to energy, more division of labor. That's what leads to people being more prosperous and having access to more material well-being than the alternative. So isn't this a worthy direction to move towards?
So where our differences lie is how we would evaluate worthiness. I think that's really a fundamental thing. You evaluate worthiness by, looking at the past and seeing that there's a laptop already in existence, and that naturally the marginal return on you reinventing the laptop at this point would be very low, and that there's an obvious rational decision for you not to start building a laptop. And there's, firstly, I would never get in the way of that conclusion. It clearly has an enormous amount of relevance, and it's an enormous part of anybody's success story to have made, as it were, those decisions based on simple rules, acknowledging that if the platform's already there, the marginal return you invest in building is low, therefore don't do it. But again, what I want to emphasize is that part of the decision-making is pretty trivial. I mean, anybody can do that. You offer no competitive advantage as a competitor by reasoning over those observations. Marginal returns is sort of useful. I agree. But where would you get the competitive advantage against all the rest of the people that were trying to flourish and make a profit by evoking and adhering to a rule like that, when in fact, all of the interesting things have been far more speculative, right? It's to go back and revisit and decide, well, it looked like the laptop had all my answers, but there was something that I needed to really customize about that and build upon it in order for it to be successful for me, and to choose software to put on top of it and so on. This was a very active and accretive and portfolio-based way of thinking, and my success came from that. It simply had to have come from that, because otherwise everybody else would have shared in my success if the only deciding factor was to spot the fact that the marginal return of building was low. And so where I want to go with this is another example based on your platform idea that's very relevant contemporarily, which is that you've said the first thing that you would want to do as a guiding principle is to apply your marginal returns model and not build the laptop. But I want to point out just what a horrendous mistake that is causing right now in everybody using laptops, right? Which is that, they've found that there's this cheap Microsoft platform to buy your laptop, and that they're doing it, but they're hugely unproductive. And all of the exciting development, if you look in the podcasts and see what's on the top of their laptop, it's not a PC. It's an expensive Apple, which didn't wasn't in agreement with a marginal returns basis. It was because you had to look deeper, and it was the deeper choices that were most important. So that's a sort of a simple example where you're encouraging me to oversimplify. I'm positioning myself as a sheep, as like everyone, whereas in fact, the survival of me is to try and find areas where I have some control over my life, and where my own accretive activities will determine the framework that I'm living in, will control and be able to build and make greater marginal returns, not through shorting.
I think here our hypotheses seem to dovetail, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but you're positioning that you have to find a place in which you're free to modify things so that you can explore a range of possibilities which is near to what you were used to. And that's absolutely true. We don't know what is next to what we have explored, or maybe we do, but we haven't explored next to what was next to it. So there's always a way to improve your system by moving toward what wasn't explored until now. The local minimum. It is a local minimum, but farther from where we have explored, it might be even more minimum or more maximum. So you can improve. There's always room to optimize, as long as we haven't achieved infinity, which we will never do. And my criticism of that would be the same that you seem to do, that you can only play with tools that are built of other tools, but you don't understand those other tools. So you can play with the symbols inside of Python, but you don't understand what those symbols mean in binary code. Or you could maybe understand that as well, and then have a very extremely comprehensive understanding of code, from transistors into logic gates, into programming languages, into the programs that you construct. And that would be a miracle. I think a very small percentage of people understand everything from so many levels of analysis. But even if you did, you don't understand the underlying process that leads transistors to work at such a minute scale and at such a high frequency. And again, even if you did, the thing that preceded that, you wouldn't understand. So how is it that someone was in the right environment to discover something to be able to make it smaller and faster with less consumption of electricity? There's at some point of ignorance that we are always forced to deal with. And if you're extremely smart, you can know a lot of levels of analysis, and other less smart people can deal with less levels of analysis and just one. And they can still be extremely talented and successful thanks to their contribution to that few levels of analysis that they can manage. And that's absolutely right. But my criticism here, I reiterate myself, is that there's always something that you don't understand, but you're dealing with. There's always a simplification that you have to make of how the universe works that you don't rationalize about. So you're building with Lego blocks, but you're not questioning the integrity of the bonds between the plastic is made of carbon and other elements. So how are those chemical bonds made? You're not questioning that. You're just assuming the existence of the blocks made of something else, but that thing is for you irrelevant at this point, and other people specialize at that. So thanks to the other people's ability to build these solid blocks, you can build with them.
Right. Well, I guess it's I'm glad that we have a sense that there is a dovetail in our thinking, and I absolutely agree with where you've placed that shared set of thinking. As I said, I acknowledge that examining marginal returns is entirely valid. I mean, I'm not invalidating that point. What I wanted to explore was the steps that you would take beyond that simple analysis, beyond that evocation of a simple and golden rule. What is it that one must do that's beyond the simplification and beyond the golden rule to succeed? That's where I'm wanting to direct the conversation. And for me, connecting with where you are going, there are assumptions about, that you have to make assumptions that, yes, I can assume that no matter how far I go with understanding as it were, the physics underneath a computer, there will always be someone better, and I should stay away from there. But what if there's this other idea that there is something social, there is something that goes on between people that's important here, namely that they, through their control of my ideas, corral me to make certain assumptions about what I can and cannot do, and that's, I think, what's important here. And that's why I keep on saying that the fundamental rules are okay. They're important, but they're just so relatively unimportant. That the acknowledgement of zero sum, the acknowledgement of the possibility of marginal returns, these are so elementary, and that there seems to be this enormous other domain that's complicated. And here's the thing: why is it complicated? Because other people are wanting to have power over you and instruct you in ways to take your behaviors that they can exploit.
Gaslighting others sometimes is profitable.
We live in a world in which most people's clever strategies involve keeping you in the dark, right?
Yeah.
And so, and returning to the laptop choice, we are flooded with the inevitability of using PCs, and there's a lot of attacks made of Apple fanboys and so fan people, and yet I feel that's part of the play, and it's the important thing to recognize. There's a social thing going on here to try and sheepify people, and corral them into focusing on these simple rules. Your computer is cheaper than mine. Incidentally, the biggest choice I made that caused me to shift away from a PC platform to an Apple platform was to actually look at the specs and discover that the Apple was cheaper. I had to buy the, as it were, cheapest model. It happened to be better than most of the advanced models of the PC. That's just another thing. But it's an example of where we are being misled, and that the shepherds are very actively controlling where the sheep sleep and keeping them that way. And I think that's why I keep on wanting to look at that social thing, because even in something as apparently straightforward as which sort of whether to buy a PC or an Apple, the influence of the disturbance of thinking that people have on the application of simple rules, they don't lead you in a good direction. They distort your choices.
I think this is a phenomenon that occurs at in every profession. Everyone is interested in making their thing seem more complex than it actually is, just so that even if from the inside they understand very well the rules governing how they can satisfy the needs of their customers, if people don't know what you're doing behind the closed doors, then you will face less competition. And that's why I think this even happens in writers. They write in a deliberately elusive manner so that people seem to think that they are deep thinkers. There's something that a big criticism I have of the French culture, that if you don't say something that people don't understand 50% of it, you are not a deep thinker. That's completely wrong. I've heard brilliant people talk in a very simple way, and one of them is Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist. He's talking about relatively important topics, and he seems to not want to delve into using complex words just so that other people might think that he's smart. There's no reason in doing that. You're not actually improving the understanding of others of how the universe works, or the map you had of how things work. You could communicate that to other people in a very simple way with a very low bandwidth, but you're deliberately increasing that, putting noise into it just so that they think that your bandwidth is bigger. And that's disgusting. And that happens everywhere. In law, in the people who write the laws, making them more complex than they should, just so that they perpetuate the need of assistance, and people who know about the law so that they can perpetuate their own business. If it was simple, they wouldn't have as much business as otherwise. Psychologists are telling you that you are so fucked up mentally, so you have to get more of their expensive services, or this happens almost everywhere. So there has to be a push and pull interaction here, in which the provider of the service will always be telling you something that you need it, and the consumer should always be skeptical of their need. But from the free dialogue between the two sides is that we have the highest hope of seeing truth. So you say that I need to buy your service, and I say my default option is not to. So you have to prove now why, and I will try to prove why not. And if one of the two fails, then we more or less move in the direction of truth. And this is the whole ethos of why we need free speech. As the ethos of my podcast is the purpose of dialogue is to let ideas die instead of us. If we have a good map of how the world works, then we can avoid bad things from happening to us. And the conflict of interest between people trying to prove each other that they are incredibly necessary, when actually the thing that they are doing most of the times is not too complex and could be learned easily if the information was shared transparently. So yeah, I think the case you're making is the case for free speech, for people being able to express their opinion. Because if you're being fooled by a person who claims to have to be thinking about very complex things, and he says, you need my services in this specific place because you couldn't do it by your own, then you need other people to be able to express their thoughts, and previous customers of this person to say, this is bullshit, he didn't help me at all. And other providers of the same service saying, actually, he's selling you 50% of a service that you don't need. So you could just buy it from me for half the price because I'm not going to introduce this bullshit into the service. So by having everyone, and the market would move towards efficiency in the long term, given that if you're taking too much profit, competition will emerge and will reduce your ability to take profit from it. And this is the leap between economics and physics that I would like to make, that there's entropy has a lot to do with this. I think that money, or the representation of value, is ultimately backed by energy. How much energy we have access to. So if for every unit of money that we have in our economy, or let's say dollars, for every dollar there were more calories that we had access to, then the dollar would be more valuable. And then there's always a funnel of energy. So if you go to a restaurant, you're paying for 500 calories, and you're paying $50, let's say, but you could buy the same amount of calories in the retail market for pennies. Why is that there's a difference? Because if you want the 500 calories, you can take it electric shock, and your body will not be able to metabolize it, or oil, and neither. So you have to convert that into some other useful thing. And in the process of converting from the most basic raw form of energy into the useful one, there's a loss, a certain loss of the energy. So you lose 90% of it just so that you can put it into a plate. The food had to be harvested, grown, fed to animals, and then those animals had to be transported, butchered, and the meat and the vegetables had to be conserved, cooled, and transported again, then cooked, and then put to you in a plate by a person. And the rent of all the places, and the construction of all the houses and restaurants, and all of those things that had all of the pieces in the chain of commerce had to be fed by more energy. So you're paying for the 500 calories that you're paying for, you're actually getting access to 50,000 calories. And that's the actual cost of the energy. Oh.
Right. So, I mean, again, we agree that analysis is important. And there's no denying that there are these. I mean, energy is a fundamental transaction. Costs around energy is a fundamental transaction. It's an inescapable part of any activity, that its underlying use of joules of energy are fixed, and that you can never fight that. But again, I would say those sorts of computations, anybody can do them. I mean, they can just even defer to the newspaper to give them the answer to that question. And there's no. So if you're wanting to progress through the world using the value of your own model, then you've got no competitive advantage there. It's just a simple truth, and it's very useful. So we agree about its fundamental nature, but what I'm wanting to emphasize is that all of the interesting activities come around the choices that can't be made in the same way by everybody around you, right? Because the interesting thing is to dodge the other person's attempt to impede your progress. Just knowing that there's a global movement all in one direction, they're all obeying the same underlying physics such that their activities are anchored on the amount of energy that they need to consume to go about their daily life. This is elementary. When it comes to being out in the real world, your own flourishing just has to go beyond that, and your competitive advantage cannot lie at this more fundamental domain, unless that's being concealed. But that's the sort of thing that just sort of, you can be a conspiracy theorist and feel that energy companies are trying to trick you into not understand the value of a unit of energy. But I mean, that's just a big paranoid system, and I don't have any time for it. I'm much more interested in the fact that people chart their own paths independent of that global energy, underlying energy rule, that simple rule. They chart their own much more varied path through space and time based on other insights that only they have.
Yep.
And that, again, it's the activity to chart that path that is much more a definer of flourishing, rather than any meditation about the underlying physics of energy use. Really, firstly, because it's something that most people can have access to, and second, because it ignores this whole other part of charting action that goes beyond the simple rule and starts to try and embrace the interplay of rules, a more qualitative exercise, the combinations of rules, whereby no single rule is given primacy, and that people accept that they'll have to, as it were, opportunistically and empirically deploy rules that taken together don't make sense. There's no way to cohere them, but that nonetheless, time by time, moment by moment, it is that choice of a much richer set of rules that determine whether we succeed or fail.
Yeah, and human ingenuity is the ultimate resource here. There's no other resource. If you nudge human ingenuity to less, then all of your resources stop being resources, because you lose the information of how to use the raw materials in nature to satisfy our needs. And from the raw energy that we get from the world to the bowl of rice that you get in a restaurant, there's a few steps that all of them are subject to be optimized. So there's a huge profit to be made there, because if you optimize a process from costing $100 to $50, then you can sell that same thing for $75 and make a profit. And through the process of profit seeking, in the long term, it's that interests are aligned. And this is a beautiful insight that I had. Maybe it's not mine, but it's a beautiful insight that I think exists, which is that in the long term, interests are aligned. In the short term, they are less so. And they're exactly in the direction that you were pointing to. That people are interested in gaslighting each other so that they make others believe that they are more useful than they are. That's in the short term. But as you increase the time frame on which you think, the profitability of making others believe that they need you when they don't is less. This is the same reason why slavery is not profitable in our current economy. If you put a gun into the head of someone and you force them to do very easy labor, which is strenuous physically but cognitively easy to perform, you're not making them extract or produce as much energy as they could were they to become an engineer and think of productive ways of using that. So if you, in the time frame of 5 minutes, sure, the best way of putting other people's resources to use for your needs is by slaving them. But as you increase the time frame from minutes to hours, to weeks, to years, to decades, into centuries, it starts to be less and less profitable, because there's more things that could have happened in the time frame of that person, and that would have led to your coercion to stop being profitable.
Okay, but I've got to ask you, Alex, when you describe that particular scenario and make that case, is it because you've understood that you've arrived at a truth, a universal truth about the inefficiency of slavery, which I think is what you're doing there? You're finding another simple rule. Or is it rather that, you're simply making use of a series of observations now shared that anybody can deploy, and that they would just avoid that, right? It's not that it arrived at some ultimate truth. It's that it's now just part of the shared capital of thinking that we kind of know that it's best to, it's just not going to work with slavery. But that's not because we've unpeeled another layer of the onion. I don't believe that. It's just that we've made a set of observations. It's useful, but it's now no longer part of it's something that it's a short. You don't take that strategy, but it doesn't inform you about how to take the actions that will help you to flourish. It's not the arrival of a deeper insight. No, it's just another thing to short. It doesn't help you to become a portfolio builder.
It does, I think. Because
it certainly helps you to do the simple short, but it doesn't help you make money, because that's a process that of course you short the option of enslaving people by not making an investment in that strategy, but that's now something that everybody has. It's not interesting.
No,
and
but
it isn't that society came to some sort of over time that it elaborated an ever more perfect model of human freedom. No, it's just that we were able to summarily reject a particular mode of labor exchange. Why dress it up? It's just now a simple short. The most interesting part is not, the great business people of today are not concerning themselves with, whether to short slavery. Incidentally, the ones that are very successful right now have found clever ways of re-implementing it into their profit extracting strategy. I mean, it's of course understood that very successful tech companies have a layer of economic activity that is highly exploitative, and so again, they haven't even shorted it. Incidentally, they've found clever ways to conceal an exploitative labor practice, but they certainly haven't rejected it. So again, I point to the fact that the simple rule, we shouldn't enslave, it's undeciding. I mean, certainly if you don't have any power and capital, you're best to avoid it, because people could judge you and immediately annihilate you should you have no power in the marketplace. Just realizing, for example, that the most powerful participants in the technological marketplace, they don't reject it. They continue to do it. They just simply know that being the shepherd, they can pursue their project. But there's no simple rule. It's rather their clever negotiation of rules, rather than the insight that we don't have an efficient labor policy based on ultra extractive things. They actually deploy it.
I was trying to point my finger at the direction of the movement of how the patterns of behavior between humans. So as we increase the time frame on which we think, exploiting others becomes less and less profitable because there's more room for competition to out.
I really thought I rejected that, right? I mean, because basically you were wanting to frame that insight as some sort of layered, deeper discovery into the nature of the universe, and I was flatly rejecting that claim about that knowledge. I was simply pointing out that we have enough evidence empirically to rule that out. It's not that we've got a better model. We've just shorted one class of model and removed it. But we're no longer making use of that insight, because the forward progress is based on yet other constructive processes of what to do when you get up in the morning.
What is that empirical evidence that you're pointing to disprove my model?
Oh, the model, as I say, I think it was easily disproved because the most successful tech companies now have found a way to reinvent extractive labor practices. So, I mean, I don't even believe that the insight that we shouldn't have slavery, I don't even believe that is a feature of the most successful tech companies that we have today. So, I mean, that's a pretty flat rejection. And then beyond that, beyond the realization that it didn't even apply because they actually do deploy extractive labor practices. Beyond that, the insight that they have or may or have had was in a completely different domain. It wasn't that they had a deeper understanding of humanity. It's that they had a deeper understanding of how to apply conflicting rules on a day-to-day basis and move and navigate around the world.
Extractive there implicitly says that the economy is a zero-sum game. And this ties down, again, to entropy. At an ultimate level, if we optimize everything to infinity, yes, it would be a zero-sum game. But because there's so much room, by orders and orders of magnitude, There's room to optimize our processes. The economy is not a zero-sum game. And the ultimate bottleneck enhancing is our ingenuity. So if we are smart enough to optimize a process, we can make more with less. There's almost an infinite amount of optimization that we can make. And the extraction that you think, I would think, comes from a majority from Southeast Asian countries, right? That they work for very little and they work many hours. Is that the kind of extraction that you're talking about?
No, it wasn't actually. I mean, I have some of the utmost respect for not just the economic efficiency of Southeast Asia, but for the very richness of which they apply complex rules to go about their daily life. I mean, I don't consider, as it were, Southeast Asia to be a way of a geography to be a way of understanding the extraction process here, if that was your question.
So where is the extraction occurring, according to you?
Well, I think the insight was that you could you didn't have to confine it to a particular geography of slave. You rather confined it to a particular employment contract, wherever the person lived.
So this is Marxism in its essence. It's the belief that the labor is not sufficiently paid for, right?
Correct.
That there's an economic surplus that the capitalist gets. The value that the capitalist adds to the production process is not good enough to justify their profit. But that in a free market in which capital competes with itself is not true. Because if you believe that with my business I'm making too much profit, and you can deploy your capital to make competition to my company, and as long as there's not government-given granted monopoly, which is the reason why most, if not all, of the monopolies that currently exist are there, people will bring capital to a table to make a profit out of your excessive profits. If you're making too much profit, if your position of capitalist is not justified in the marketplace because someone else would be able to do your same job, they will offer higher employment rates. They will offer higher wages, and then people will come to your company to work if you really think that you can outcompete the position of the other person. So in companies, in every business, there's multiple positions. There's the capitalist, there's the manager, there's the workers. Those are the three main positions that you can take inside of a business. And there's millions of types of people in every of those. People specialize in different realms, but those are the three main ones. So if you're a worker and you're providing your labor, which is specialized and can be very complex to achieve having the skills to do it, you're not thinking of the business model. Neither you are risking your own capital through the deployment of your labor, but the capitalist is. And a lot of the times, the capitalist and the manager are the same person. So the CEO is also the major shareholder of the company. So I think that the proportion of the profit that is given to the capitalists depends on how accessible capital is in the economy and how accessible it is to deploy capital in their same sector. So if you are Apple and I'm Microsoft and I'm trying to compete you out of existence because I think that you charge too much to your customers, I will try to offer your customers an alternative product which is better than yours. And I will reduce the profit margin from 100 to 75, and I will make a profit because it cost me 50 to produce to you as well, but I'm offering the same thing for 75, and now I'm selling more than I would have were I to not do this at all. So I don't believe. I think that this is wrong. The statement that the capitalists get more than they should, as long as there's a free market, is not true.
Okay, so where we agree is that I think there's a lot of angry rhetoric about what capitalists deserve or don't deserve. I know that my own deepest instincts and my own deepest way of identifying with myself and my relation to others is that I make an emphasis on ideas and the importance of ideas. And that's exactly what tech brilliant people do. They assert that it's the ideas that is the competitive advantage here, and that we're being distracted by conversations about whether they've exploited people. So, what I'm saying is that at some level, I'm of course very skeptical of my own view here and aware of its limitations, but actually I accord completely with what you're saying. I don't agree with the rhetorical argument around exploitation. One thing, so I don't believe that, I do actually think that exploitation is a strange concept. It is itself quite rhetorical. I don't spend my time discussing exploitation. What I would say, though, is that the claim that there's a market system that can, as it were, correct those distortions. So in other words, a market system that could discover that strategy of extractive exploitation is inefficient and will correct upon it. That's just absolute nonsense, Alex. I mean, the reality is that these monopolies ride through decades of craziness, and typically they implode rather than die, right? So in other words, they end up occupying a large space in the market for which there's no real substance, and they disappear. It's not that they shrink and occupy an ever smaller part of the space, or that they're overtaken, by others. It's rather that they implode. They implode from within. And that the telecom companies that attracted all of the capital until the end of the 90s simply didn't, overnight were revalued and downwards aggressively, and that other people grew from there. But there was no market process there. There was no rational and systematic play of markets and participants. It was just that the illusion of value was evaporated. It was not to do with the market. It was to do with people's perceptions and insights about what does not have value.
Isn't that the market?
Had absolutely nothing to do with that. It was the market of ideas, yes. But it wasn't the market. It wasn't the traded capital, because the traded capital had a time course that was discontinuous. If ever you see a discontinuous function, like a thing that takes a step, that in other words, that the next point in the time series is in no way predicted by the event before. What you have there is a stochastic process. You have something for which randomness is the big player, rather than as it were. Some sort of rule-based dynamics, or that are to do with the laws of the market. No, you have a thing that shows that all of the participants had deluded themselves, and that they simply were disabased of their folly. The market had nothing to do with it.
And that's bad for them. The people who were investing their capital in those companies, who were later proven to not be deploying their capital in a productive manner, had to reallocate their capital somewhere else by selling their stock.
Yes, and there's wealth destruction there, yes, which is a disaster, yes.
And people are disincentivized to do that because they lose wealth.
Right, but of course, as we agree, the game doesn't play on forever, and that eventually the underlying will assert itself. But I mean, along the way, you'll get a lot of market distortions, and that's why. I mean, I absolutely think that the frameworks that we consensually define as market-based are, that they're irrelevant. First of all, they operate in times of where there's no stress applied to them, and they're allowed to just grow like ugly mushrooms. But the moment the pressure comes on, then these simple rules fall away immediately, and some other much more complicated dynamic overrides them. So I can't really imagine why anybody would want to simplify something as complicated as commerce. Why they would simplify commerce in terms of a simple market model? Because empirically, all of the time series, so the observations that you can make about the behaviors of markets, all of those time series contain discontinuities. In other words, there was nothing captured by the rules being applied or the thinking of the participants that was correct. The dynamics were outside of the market. That's what ruled.
But the underlying everything, there's a judgment of people of how to optimally invest their effort so that they can make the most profit, right?
You said actually that underlying it was the energy used in order to compute those ideas. Stick to that. That's the physics.
Yeah, but there's multiple levels. And on top of that, there's people believing things. And on top of that, there's the product.
Capitalists don't think of multiple levels, right? They have just the underlying. and then the errors that you introduce to that. That sounds like a level, doesn't it? But in fact, it's a mistake to talk about that as a meta level. No, because what you realize is that it's the underlying that is important, and the rest was simply error. It didn't belong to the model. The model was physics. The model was the cost of deploying the idea, measured in calories, joules.
Okay, but you cannot disprove my claim that there's ways of using our knowledge that would lead to more or less abundance, right?
It depends what you mean by ways. Is there an overriding model called the market that would make it predictive? No. Is there an unpredicted element, a physics underlying it that for which it is anchored on? Yes, it is anchored on.
But let's say we all got convinced that putting a nail into our hands every morning and bleeding and suffering from it would be a good idea, and we just instill the tradition and it spreads across society. I don't know why it would, and that's part of an irrationality I'm assuming that people would have to have for this to be the case. But if we all assume that that was good, we would spend so many of our resources in taking care of our hands because they would have an injury which they don't have to. So that would be a bad way of behaving. And that would lead us to be more poor because we're having to take care of something that didn't have to exist. We've built a new problem to deal with, and that makes us have less things to deal with other things. Right?
So you're saying we can, as a first assumption, say that the world will not be full of such dreadful ideas. Is that where you're leading? That's dangerous. There's plenty of ideas that are just as silly on reflection as nailing your hands every morning.
Marxism.
That wasn't the first one that came to mind. It was rather religion, for which Marxism was an extremely powerful fire to evaporate religion.
But in the fire, they threw the baby with the bathwater.
You and I have discussed this at length, and we're completely in agreement. Marx, as a predictor of an overlying level of how societies progress, was a journalist and nothing beyond that. As someone that came up with a model of capital, it's analogous to his latest incarnation of Piketty, who is someone that is not concerned with, as it were, social engineering, but with describing, where it is the underlying of value and the distortions that you can readily measure from those value estimations.
I was trying to agree with you in that there's ways of fooling ourselves and believing wrong things, but there's still a mechanism by which people correct these errors. And if you correct it, you can make a profit out of it. That's the essence of the market. If you discover that someone is stupid and it's doing something suboptimally, you can outcompete them out of existence.
Correct. But that prediction was not based on the application of a simple elementary rule. You see, that's really where we do disagree. It was of course acknowledging certain rules, but all of the, as it were, positive actions that resulted in the addition of value, they were running in parallel to those simple rules. And you believe that the rules were the underlying. This is really where we differ, and why I began, before we began recording this, by distinguishing between physics and models. The physics is the underlying here. The models are always imperfect. They provide a crutch. They can help you avoid ultra silly mistakes, but they're not part of the interesting part. They are, and can be, a very big distraction towards the interesting part of life. The models are different. They are the rules. Rules, we can only interact in the world in so much as that we can follow rules and engineer better ones over time. Mm-hmm. But what goes on in the world is not determined by the rules. It's absolutely not determined by the rules. The rules are not a distillation of reality. Reality is reality. The rules capture a way of interacting with it, for better or worse,
Yep.
for good rules or bad. But mathematicians make the rather extraordinarily stupid mistake, in my view, of thinking that it is the maths that distills truth,
But
not the physics itself.
Couldn't everything you just said be boiled down to knowledge is provisional? Everything is subject to be contradicted.
Yes, but you see, that's a negative statement about vis-a-vis prediction. You see, all you're doing there is defining the hedge. Knowledge is provisional. We can't assume that what we know will be tomorrow. That's a hedge. That's only a hedge. And investments are composed of risk-adjusted returns. In other words, they are composed of actions, positive, active accumulation of assets, with a plan B, a hedge, that would insure you against the downsides of those positive actions. But where's the magic? In the hedge? I mean, are you serious? It's not in the hedge. The hedge is the elementary part. It's the reasoning around the portfolio that makes the money.
But at some point, you have to choose how to invest your resources. You have something, and how do you invest it?
At all points you do. And with all levels of uncertainty. And with the creative process that's highly empirical. Creative is the wrong word. It's with an empirical process, with an attempt to be as close to the data as you can, and to take ongoing steps that occurred with the model that you have.
Okay, so in my view, let me rephrase what you just said. Your position is analogous to the person who goes to a businessman and says, your business is not optimized 100%, or it could be even proven wrong at some point in the future. But you are not offering an alternative. You're just saying that it can be optimized,
That's
right?
a very strange reading, because, it's just sort of, I can't imagine my position. That's the antithesis of my position. When I go to a business person, I explain a complex set of things at play that they are... I do explain the hedge. I do explain the downside risk of their current strategy. But I'm all about saying that there are empirically, and of course it's only with evidence that I only open my mouth in front of an investor if I believe that I've got superior ideas. But I never too much concern myself with the hedge. Business people that are about to invest money, they consider themselves the master of the hedge. Right? They know how to look me in the eye and decide whether I'm sort of trustworthy. Okay, but the reason that I'm in front of them at all is because they actually don't have the creative stuff, the empirical stuff, the sensitivity towards the data to take actions. They rather can only manage their risk. That's all they can do as investors. They need ideas.
How does this idea you're trying to explain map into the fact that from the Industrial Revolution to now, every single thing has plummeted in cost in terms of hours of labor? So the most rudimentary form of labor, someone who can, a job, a position which can be had by everyone.
Through a skepticism, yes. I mean, I can see why you want to simplify it. So the comeback that I was going to make there is that I think that what describes the extreme uptick in productivity of the last 200 years is that they were skeptical about whether the things that they'd done, the way they'd done things before, were right or not, and that they realized that you could throw a lot of this stuff away, and that we should go out looking for more things. And that I can see that skepticism is something that really appeals to you, and of course it appeals to me as well. It's to be skeptical that the things are being done the right way today. That's important. You've got to be ready to cast aside the things that you've done before in favor of better ideas. But the skepticism is a very useful tool. As a hedge is a very useful tool for an investor. But the magic is somewhere else.
But my claim was simpler than that. I'm saying, given the undoubtable fact that we have a more abundant environment right now, our understanding of how the world works has to in some way map into reality. If it didn't, our abundance wouldn't have increased. Even if you did reduce all of human knowledge into this increases our resource or our material abundance. That claim has to in some way map into reality. If it didn't, we wouldn't have more material abundance, right?
Correct. Yes. Where are you going with that?
That our maps of how the world works are in some way right. And whatever theory you're trying to explain, which I haven't been able to understand fully, can only be a statement of it can be better. But you're not offering an alternative because it maps in some way to reality.
It does. Very much so. It's an orientation towards the next step you take in life. Is it because you believe that you're becoming ever, that you're just away from grasping the underlying truth of the world, which is the religious view? Or is it the Spinozian view, which is that you're just taking great evasive action on the basis of the evidence that's right in front of you right now to do good stuff, to express yourself easily? And what I find fascinating in your repeated rejection of my position as lacking substance is that the substance is in the observations. Of course, I'm not communicating to you the individual observations that I make before I would, if you were an investor, before I would bring that to you. That's a separate conversation where I go about describing how it is that I'm sensitive to the data right now and taking action to make the next best step. That's the substance of my argument. And we're not talking about that. We aren't. I mean, we're not actually sitting down here for 2 hours to describe you why it is that I've chosen a particular technology stack for my latest business project. No, we're having a conversation about, what goes on in my thinking, my orientation. And the orientation that my thinking has is that I'm an empirical person. I simply discard the significance of some overlying truth. I discard the significance that we're heading there. These things are irrelevant to my day. My day is anchored in facts that I could list if we are having a conversation about the choices that I've made, even in the 3 hours before I've come to your place today. That's a separate conversation. Instead, we are talking about the topic of what it is that we're doing in this process. And you want to maintain it's to find the simplest rules and to apply them. And that's all it. And that, for me, is the ultimate lack of substance. Because at no point have you considered any data point. You're just believing that there is an ever more perfect rule that you can achieve. And the insight, and I just disagree with that. It's just not what I'm doing. I'm doing a reactive process to the data. I'm fitting to data on a moment-by-moment basis. I'm absolutely not imagining the glory of global minima, so optimal solutions. This is just not how I take any single moment of my day. I regard that as a kind of quasi-religious project. And I resist it because it's not empirical.
And that is in itself quasi-religious, because so this is analogous to my belief in the scientific method, that it can be boiled down to what I said before, that knowledge is provisional. Everything we believe is subject to being disproven with further evidence. And that in itself is quasi-religious, because we've seen this pattern applied to every single instance of our past. And then we say everyone became too confident at some point and they were proven wrong. Sure, that's absolutely true. That's why we should allow free speech and the scientific method to reign supreme over our world. That's 100% right. But the process of deriving that is in itself quasi-religious, because there's what evidence could disprove this?
Yes, I mean, all along there's a line of reacting to responding, not reacting, to responding to this argument that as it were goes with it and sees the contradiction. And I'm well and truly aware of it. So, I mean, my favorite philosophers are, if we take Spinoza, he, by some people, is accused of the worst form of deist. It is amazing how Goethe appraised Spinoza's thought as the worst loathsome form of religion. And yet I see that it is the coexistence and the acceptance of unknown, but coexisting with another much more accretive, active, empirical process. That the criticism of Spinoza as the worst form of deist, that criticism, well, first of all, I think it's fundamentally wrong, and second of all, I believe that it's motivated by an objectionable cultural process that's applied to the thinkers, these thinkers, a very cheap shot, an inhumane shot. I have very strong feelings about how inadequate those criticisms are, as I say, because they lack substance, and because they also, to me, suggest a vile sort of dismissive cultural weirdness that I really, really have no time for. But all of the people that I've respected, and the great line of thinkers that we can look at here, going from pre-Socratics, these people have always suffered this criticism that they are deists in essence, that there's this sort of overlying part. And I'm just fascinated with how that claim can still survive when so much of what they're actually talking about is an empirical process. It's as if we can restate the empirical project as many times as we have breath for, and yet the audience can take a decision, a blanket decision, that they're not hearing it, but I think they've got their fingers in their ears.
How does this connect to entropy only increases?
Well, you see, the entropy increase idea is so it's not observational, right? It's been observed inductively. You can see that from observations that agree with it, that you could go with it as a theory. But of course, empirically, it's a conjecture.
But isn't we have empirical evidence that the universe is
not
expanding
on global scales.
No, but we do have. Well,
no, it's mathematics. It's model.
Sure,
it's astrophysics.
Sure. It's
astromathematics. Actually,
the limit,
it's important, yeah.
The limit of the observable universe could be expanding into another expanding universe, and then in its total, it could be becoming smaller or staying the same. So it could be expanding into another.
We're not out there making the measurements, so that's the thing. We are satisfied with the tools that we have to make local measurements here of events that are distal, and that they agree with these models, but they are simply not empirical. They are model driven. They require an awful lot of filtering of the data. Filtering, incidentally, that every now and then, when they come up with a radically different filter, then the data can really shift about, most wildly, profound and surprising way. Just saying. I mean, models, cosmological models are highly variable and dynamic. They are not settled. So again, I remind you that the claims around the global phenomenon are not empirical. They are a conjecture. They're a conjecture. And I'm a person that wants to make good use of conjecture, particularly by way of a hedge. Right? I can see that if certain downside risks are very substantial, that my own moment-by-moment activities will avoid those. But that doesn't guide me towards the empirically driven process. That's a model-driven process. That's past learnings, for example, that I keep on reminding you that everybody has at their disposal because they're written up. You can read them. And that there's no real competitive advantage because everybody knows them. The much more interesting process is the moment-by-moment empirical process of putting Lego block yellow on top of yellow block blue and building the structure. And that's not guided by a model. It's an empirical thing. It's about according with a moment-by-moment piece of data. It's not a model.
But that's not different from knowledge is provisional. In the same way that I could say, with more evidence, the opposite of your statement could be true. Always. So let's say I suspect that an alien came into my room and made my room. And then you could show me how a camera recording of my room, and you show me doing my bed a few hours ago. And then I would say, yeah, but it's still, there's more evidence that could point towards your claim being wrong, that I didn't do it. An alien actually did it. So I take more evidence than the one provided by you, and I say, if you consider not only the local, but a bit farther from it, you can see that the possibility of an alien modifying my mind and forcing me to do the bad could exist, so it could be that. And then you prove that there was no alien around my house, so, and then I could say no, but it's all an international conspiracy of aliens coming from other galaxies. So there's always, whatever your level of analysis is, you can take another bigger one which encompasses more things and say whatever is outside of it is conspiring to make the thing in the inside look in that way, but actually is the reverse. That is always the case. You can always make that claim.
No, it's not always the case. It's a possible ideation over the data, right? It's a way of appraising the data systematically, and it's a way of forming your ideas about the data. Mm-hmm. But why is that interesting? In fact, the thing that guides me in telling you that an alien didn't make your bed while you were outside the room is a Bayesian process, making it just simply unlikely. I mean, I wasn't there to make the observation, but it is more likely that because you get up early in the morning and have a long day ahead of you, that there are certain things that you don't keep track of, and that you cleaned your room and made your bed yourself. And it's from a Bayesian perspective, the prior suggests that it was more likely that it was your own ideation that forgot that you made the bed rather than that a little green man did so.
But you're basing your statement on a series of points of evidence that you have of previous instances. So you know that yesterday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, 5 days ago, I did the same thing. And now I suddenly believe that an alien did it. But then you should ask me, what do I think about the previous days? And then if you ask me that, then what if I also said that those days were also influenced by an alien? At some point, you stop being able to apply the previous tendency to predict the next step.
Well, that's an empirical question. I mean, you talked about the situation of where I've come in on the day you've ascribed the room change to an alien and made the guess that it probably wasn't. And now you've imagined a situation in which I'd come a week before. That's just a pure thought experiment.
No, but the Bayesian statement that you were making has to...
The Bayesian statement applies to right here and right now. You then don't imagine a further non-empirical scenario, namely that it just so happens I had made the observations those weeks before. No, they're not priors. Bayesian reasoning is around the introduction of observable priors.
What are those observable priors in this case?
Well, in this case, they would be only the possible one of when I was wanting, the day I came and judged to truth or otherwise of your claim that an alien made your bed.
And based on
that's where it would end.
And based on what do you claim that my statement was ridiculous?
And we would know that I could only make the statement today, and that I'm not making a Bayesian prediction about some other moment in time. I could genuinely claim to you that there could be another scenario where I came in a week before and had observations in this imaginary scenario of seeing a flying saucer. But this is not relevant.
No, where I'm going is that you have to have previous evidence pointing in the opposite direction of the claim that you're facing. You've never, any room, any person has been organized by an alien. So my claim now that mine seems very little probable, given your previous evidence.
On the day I'd rejected. Where are we going?
That every statement you make is based on previous evidence. And if I claim that evidence was also contaminated by the alien, because whatever map you build of how rooms are organized in all the humans you've interacted with,
they would be your claims, not mine.
The ones
I'm coming with my priors.
Yeah,
I'm not allowing yours to interfere with mine if I've already rejected them.
But I say that my alien is so overwhelmingly important in the universe that whatever priors you've built in this universe is also contaminated by my alien.
Right, and I would classify that prior as belonging to the same class of misinformed prior that told me that the alien was there in the first place.
And what evidence do you have to claim that?
It wouldn't add any more or little or less evidence to it, because all I'd have is the moment of the claim. If you were to start reasoning, as you are trying now, over a hypothetical scenario, then that adds no new information to me. It's just part of your prior and your claim.
It makes my claim undisprovable. You cannot falsify it.
Well, it doesn't contribute any information. What do we... I mean, I'm going to make my own claim, not a falsification, but a speculation that on the available evidence, your claim is false.
But you're making a connection with people who were talking in the same way that I'm talking now about aliens doing things were crazy. So you're saying this guy is also probably crazy. Because everyone I've seen who were talking in the same way were crazy. So you're crazy. But again, if you're making that statement, I could encompass all of those previous pieces of evidence you've gathered in your life, saying that the people who were claiming responsibility to aliens were crazy. I would say it's the aliens who made you think that. And then my claim would be unfalsifiable. And you're right, I'm not adding any useful knowledge, but there's always a way of making any statement unfalsifiable.
Except making further observations.
And those can also be, if I can modify my model to make it to fit into the future evidence.
Right. So on that topic, you're claiming that the world is full of these incredible uncertainties that we sort of somehow live with. Not really. We really do have stable models about the evidence that we have, and we don't cause them to flap around. I mean, incidentally, any rational person could participate in the belief that certain information about aliens is withheld from us, but I don't think that's a useful discussion.
Yep.
It just isn't. Right.
Isn't it beautiful that we are arguing for the opposite point that we started arguing for?
No, because I've maintained an insistence that I'm only ever anchored on the evidence, and you are keeping on wanting to introduce a not evidential base.
No, I think I was trying to claim that there's a way of understanding the world and the cause and effect to allow us to manage our lives in a better way. And at no point I think you claimed that was wrong, but you are claiming somewhat of a epistemological bankruptcy in our model building, that the model, what backs the model in itself can never be 100% certain. And that's what I ended up arguing for with my alien example. So
we agree that they're never 100% certain.
Yeah.
Yes.
Knowledge is provisional, scientific method.
And it's a matter of how much you focus upon them in constructing your moment-by-moment set of steps. And my feeling is that those that are focused on that is unproductive. It's not anchored in observation.
What is anchored in observation?
Observation.
Isn't that tautological?
No, it's not, because if you set me a task and I'll either be able to come back to you with an observation that could help me make the decision or not. It's empirical. You'd have to explore it. There will be times when I could decide that I can't really gather the evidence that you seek, and that wouldn't be a very interesting project to me.
And how does this claim you're making connect to the eventual heat death of the universe? Because I think at no point you're trying to disprove it, right?
Correct. That's actually the best restatement that I've heard you make. I'm not trying to disprove it. Because it's not relevant to me making a good decision. I mean, that's actually a topic of marginal returns. My investment in disproving the heat death theory of the universe offers me little marginal return, and I won't even bother to do much evidence gathering. In terms of me flourishing, in the analogy for me, both of us making a computer, there's not much to be gained there, because neither of us have the skills to make a computer. Neither of us have a very ready and easy access to gathering evidence for or against the heat death of the universe. It's just irrelevant. I mean, and on the other hand, I've got a fire hose of empirical observations of so many things that I can observe on a moment-by-moment basis and feed off them and make the best decisions I can on the back of them.
So from 0 to infinity in entropy, That is that process that you're focusing on, and you're saying there's things to be done.
I'm not focusing on infinity. Infinity is a non-observable. It is.
No, I'm in between. I'm saying in between 0 and infinity, which is where we are now. We are neither in both.
No, really, honestly. Infinity is a mathematical concept for which it's not a physics concept, and there is nothing in between me and infinity.
Okay, let make it...
there just isn't.
Let me simplify it.
It's a nonsense statement.
Let me take the infinity out of it. Between the past and the future, which is the point in which we are, because we are in the present, there's things to be done.
But future, you've already introduced some non-observability. Between the past and the present, can we stick with that?
Don't you think there's
They are all observables.
But the farther to the past you go, the less observable it is.
Correct. Reliability goes down. In fact, reliability of the present can also be interfered with by people that want you to see things in one way or another. But you can explore them and think of better ways to verify them and go about your daily life.
And isn't that same reliability of the past symmetrical with the future? As you predict farther into the future, your models become less reliable, and you can create new models which are more reliable than others. The past and the future are symmetrical.
Well, that's not a claim that you can verify empirically. I'm interested in the empirical ones.
Well, I can tell you what it was doing 1 year ago, but if I try to tell you what it was doing 2 years ago, maybe...
Where's the symmetry?
There's a symmetry in that
in symmetry and uncertainty. Oh, I love that. Okay, again, I'm always trying to argue that error estimate is merely a hedge. It's not part of the interesting part. Yes, in a mathematical sense, you can find a symmetry in the error, that the error will increase apparently to what goodness knows where for both the past and the future. But that's not interesting. I mean, what on earth would be interesting about that?
That the closer to the present you are, either to the past or to the future.
That you can be more certain of some things, but yes. Not all, but yes.
So what I was trying to go with is...
It's not guiding me to do anything.
But the far future and the far past...
It's informing my hedge. It's informing the estimation, and I'm mainly concerned with the downside risk when it comes to these models. It's informing my judgment about how to manage the risk, how to hedge the risk, knowing that my uncertainty increases with the time from the present. Yes, but again, I'm only wanting to repeat that all of the interesting human activity is not in the hedge. It's not in the using that error term. That is not interesting. It doesn't.
Can I try defining hedge to see whether we're talking about the same thing?
Mm-hmm.
So hedge would be previous observations tells you that there's a way to do something better than in another way.
So it's not a hedge. That's not a hedge.
But let me give an example to see.
It's a bit weird. It's not what a hedge is.
But okay, let me give an example. So if you know that there's a chance that someone in the street will be having a gun and will be willing to shoot at you, you would go to some other street instead of that one.
Mm-hmm.
So you say, this one is risky. I will go to another one. Mm-hmm. You hedge against that by taking maybe a suboptimal pathway towards your house.
Right.
So
good example, because all it's told you is what not to do. And everybody knows that there are certain streets not to walk at a certain point of time. Not informative, affords me no competitive advantage. It's the selection of the suboptimal path, the path, the way round, that is interesting.
But again, this is analogous to having a cup of dirt and mixed with water, and by pouring new water into it, or less contaminated water, you make the average better. So the average of the streets will be less dangerous than the one you know is dangerous. So by choosing a random one, you will reduce the risk, the total risk of your system. That's a hedge.
Yes, but I mean, we don't randomly choose them.
No, but okay, if you have knowledge of a very safe one in particular, you choose that one.
Right.
But if you don't have any knowledge at all and you only know that one is bad, the best way you can act is by choosing another one, which on average will be less bad.
Yeah, and I'm only wanting to say that the downside is the thing that you're really concerning yourself with here. It's only doing part of the job. It's managing downside risk. And it's the engineering of the upside that's much more interesting. It's the engineering of an upside risk, so a surprise, an advantage. It's the putting in the building up of that scenario through your actions that offers the added value, and that's where I'm focused.
This is where I was trying to go, that there's only one direction in which we want to move. We want to avoid downside and
it
get...
involves suspension of a global model. That's the whole point.
Suspension of what?
Well, it involves the selection of that suboptimal path, right? That is to some extent a relinquishing of the model of optimality. You simply cast it aside. You say that for one or other reason, actually for the downside risk reason that the street is dangerous, you'll have to avoid it. And that while that helps you avoid going down that street, it doesn't help you build your map of how to get somewhere. The path doesn't. And that path is informed by other and much more complex rules, whereby the relentless attempt to make simple was not part of the process at all. In fact, we know that we will be going in the opposite direction of the inevitable trend of it being optimal. We know that. We just do it.
But don't you think that knowledge offers some kind of symmetry here, in that avoiding a loss and getting a win are analogous, in that they require having the right knowledge?
They're very different. Knowledge is used differently, and the whole framework is very different. I honestly believe that these models are great for hedging only. They're only good for one part of the activity. They're not good for the constructive part. They're just not good. None of the world's great business people were economists. Economists are people that get their expensive lunches paid by taxpayers by sitting at universities.
How would you map that into my example of the street? So let me.
But their value is zero. I mean, honestly, it's common sense.
Okay,
expensive. It's common salaries, not cents or dollars or tens of thousands of dollars. Generally, $150,000 invested in someone that makes very obvious truisms.
But
meanwhile, the world goes about empirically trying to find its path.
Can I map that into my example so that you can agree or disagree on my map of your map? Let me see if I got what you were saying right. The economists would say, or the hedge would say, don't walk through this street, walk through another one. But it wouldn't tell you in which one you could find a wife with which to form a family. So it tells you where not to go, but not where to go.
Correct.
And where to go requires knowledge of what is good, not only what is bad.
See, that's where the symmetry that you're trying to claim I'm pushing back on. It's a different thing. It's a different activity. It's not the same set of data. It just isn't. It involves a great deal less certainty because it's always based on a smaller amount of data that people, through their own intelligence, are able to make better use of.
Isn't this analogous to Nassim Taleb's bet that he knows who will go bankrupt, but he doesn't know who will become rich? So he bets against the people who he knows to be stupid?
Yeah, so but here again, he's an investor. He's not coming up with the ideas for which that money is being made. I mean, it's clear that there are certain companies not to invest in, but the money, and if you're an investor, so that's not someone that comes up with ideas, but rather someone that just happens to either own or be the controlling person of capital to make an allocation. This is okay. It's interesting, and I'm glad it's done. It's risk adjusted in the way it's done. There are lots of aspects that I.
Yeah, but doesn't this represent what you were trying to say?
No, because what I'm trying to say is that there's this whole other class of activity that's made under such a level of uncertainty that the whole risk-adjusted process becomes a bit irrelevant. I mean, it's just not what's guiding people. The process of building things is the engineering is different from simple models. It's the combination of and difficult synthesis of competing and complex ideas to come up with a moment-by-moment set of actions. This is so much more interesting than the thing that anybody can do.
Are you claiming that when you're doing something, let's say you're an engineer designing a computer, you have access to knowledge which cannot be accessed by a person building a hedging model? So you are in touch with the physical reality of what is required to be able to construct a laptop. And that knowledge, which is practical, is not had by the abstracted notion of engineers designing different types of computers. And that lack of specific knowledge of what is going on in the minds of the engineers when they're doing the thing, you only have the abstracted notion of engineers in companies which have a D in the name of their company seem to be more productive. And you abstract that correlation, you say, oh, this is great. But you don't actually know what's driving the productivity in where the rubber meets the road, which is the engineer with his skills and his intelligence thinking of different ways of organizing the things inside of the computer to make it function better. Is the difference between the manager who doesn't know what the engineer is doing and the engineer who's touching the reality? Is the abstraction which loses resolution?
I don't know whether it can be framed in those terms. Engineers are always very complicated because engineers, they're not pure practitioners. Engineers are also trusted as it were, investors. They're expected to consider models and model risk in the way that scientists in general are not.
Okay, and a car mechanic, he knows what goes on inside of the engine, and he knows why that specific one didn't work. But the manager on top of him knows nothing. He wasn't even in the repair shop that day. He was just seeing that he didn't give the number. That day he didn't make as much profit, or he didn't attract as many customers. So he complains about it. And that abstraction level, the manager has multiple car shops, and the mechanic has access to the most basic form of reality. He's not abstracted away from reality. He knows what he's dealing with. And that knowledge he can give reasons why it didn't work or did work, but the manager only seeing the number, whether it did work or didn't work. By not having access to what made it not work, why that day you didn't make as much profit, he can claim that the car mechanic is incompetent when he's actually not.
Yes.
So that further increase in resolution that you can make by going closer to the fundamental layer of reality, well, both are required. You have to get both levels of analysis to have a successful business, right? But what I was trying to map your theory. If I'm able to map your theory into something, then I can be confident that I understood it correctly. So the abstraction that the manager makes, he's not seeing the engine. He's just seeing the numbers. That loses resolution, but it also gives you some new information. So that losing of resolution is what makes you believe that he's not actually building a good enough model. That there's no way of building a good model at that level of analysis.
Well, it wouldn't be anchored on the same evidence, that's all.
Which evidence?
Well, one's anchored on the numbers, and the other one's anchored upon the physical workshop activities, but they're just different data. And if you decide that one piece of data is more informative than the other for your own goals, like to make a profit, it would be highly informative to have an aggregation of activities mapped against daily profits.
Yep.
But they're just simply different data, right? I mean, it's the same activity, but you're measuring a different property of that activity. What's the difference there? I mean, and a mechanic that owns their own mechanic shop will be simultaneously realizing the profitability of the different activities as well as actually doing them.
So how does your theory map into the epistemological nature of these two people? How does the model of one...
Not as a layer and meta layer analogy that you're talking about. It's just different forms of data. They belong to the same level of an empirical observation, but they're not... One's not metaphysics of another. It's the claim that somehow the day-to-day profit is an abstraction of the activity that I'm resisting and rejecting. It's just further observations of the same activity.
So the aggregate of the activities of the multiple mechanics that you are managing gives you a different information.
Well, remember that. See, you've evoked the term aggregation there, but things are never. Aggregation is never simply accretive.
Okay, the average.
Yes. Well, even okay, the average. Okay, that well. If you feel like that the variability in your measurements is such that an average is a good description of it, then you would go with an average. But otherwise, you might choose not to. You might disaggregate the information and maybe do a trend. It's what I'm resisting is that there's a level of abstraction that differs between them two. But I'm asserting that they measure different properties of the same thing, and that someone whose goals is to make a profit will measure the profitability, and someone whose goal it is to ensure that the cars are being fixed will measure the actual fixing part. But there's no hierarchy there. It can happen that there is a hierarchy. Incidentally, in the case of a mechanic, generally the managers of mechanic shops were once mechanics, so it's not really a hierarchy. They're just older, and they're unable physically probably to get under the car quite so easily, and so it's better in order to keep them in employment to give them an office job. But I mean, it's a good example of how the data hasn't changed. It's just a different way of measuring the same activity.
So how does the epistemological bankruptcy affect to this? How is it that... So my claim is that we can build models that better and better represent reality, but we will never achieve perfection.
And we agree on that. It's the intention to even dwell on that I'm differing from you. Right? There's going to be different... There's going to be a marginal return to it. You know, at a certain point, gathering extra evidence won't really improve the predicativism model. There's all those things. But I'm saying that I'm not seeking an ever more simplified model. I'm seeking an ever richer prior upon which to make a moment-by-moment decision. It's just a totally different exercise.
Where do you get that prior from?
Well, one way of discussing the prior is that it's a state, so that I can... The prior would be a collection of things that I keep in mind as I make the decision. And the interesting part about that is that the mind is limited, and generally you'll erase parts of the state on a moment-by-moment basis. You won't keep in track what you had for lunch at the mechanic shop a year ago, because although it could give you some insight, it's not going to be part of your current state. But the state, yes, so the state is not something I'm... the state is the state. I mean, what's your interest in the state? Of course, there will be some priors, but my point is that it will be a commitment to the to salient observations. It could really be that an event very much in the distant past. It's not just a simple time matter that I will only focus on the present. One of my keyest insights as a mechanic could be that on the day that I ate too many sausages for breakfast and my blood was kind of full of fat and I was all kind of groggy with that was when the jack wasn't put in place and I nearly got my head crushed. I mean, it's not just that I'll ignore that event because it happened 5 years ago. It remains a salient part of state. But you just do it opportunistically, and the extent to which you succeeded as a mechanic is to maintain, with the limitations that you have, a good set of state. It's not, however, that you feel like that you are getting to some ever more perfect, simple model of how it is to become a mechanic.
Well, what would be a proxy for that? Can there even be a proxy for...
Well, I suppose that's the question that I'm answering the negative. The proxy is irrelevant. What is it? I mean, why are we concerning ourselves with that? We're trying to do well at the mechanics.
How about fitness as an ultimate proxy for whether you're good or not?
Because the simplification just might not capture... It might not... First of all, it might not capture things accurately on the moment-by-moment basis. It certainly won't capture, as it were, the moment by basis forever. It will gradually become stale and less relevant. A fitness state at one particular moment will inevitably decline because of the way the world evolves, which brings me right back to the very early statements that you were making about models and defining them in words. And that the key insight from linguistics in the last 100 years, and there wasn't too much talk of it beforehand, but in the last 100 years, we came to this painful realization that the efforts to simplify the use of words were highly valuable. We want to reject the people that simply want to distract or obfuscate through their use of language and basically deceive us and engineer our thinking according to that. We want to reject the nonsense, the pretense of language. But fundamentally, the Wittgensteins of this world that try to bring this point into the utmost of clarity, fundamentally they realize that the atom, the word, doesn't have a true existence itself. So you can sort of be concerned with doing a good job with the use of a word and not using a fluffy word, but the words don't have independent meanings. The whole reason why large language models work now is because when you train them, you don't train them on the meanings of words. To be very clear, the individual words upon which a language model is trained, that word itself is masked. The trainer does not get to see that word. It rather gets to see the words around it and sees statistically the complex ways in which context determines the meaning of the word. So here's another lesson for me from a very contemporary example about how the word, the model, the essence, the simplicity is not available to us. The richness of our performance depends upon the richness of the latent space, the fact that the word doesn't have a fixed meaning, the fact that on a moment-by-moment basis you recompute the meaning of things, you re-evaluate what the next action should be, rather than imagining some explicit model. The explicit models don't work. The reason why large language models work so brilliantly is that they use what's called a latent space. The definitions of the words are constantly changing depending on what you put into them. There is no simple model. There's only a complex latent space that you opportunistically make use of on a sentence-by-sentence basis so that the next word you use hits the spot.
Wouldn't that allow us to make a meta model of how to build that?
No. That's exactly why people are very upset about these models, because one of the questions is, oh, great, you've got this great model. Can you explain to me, could you give me the meta model? I mean, can you tell me what this thing is actually doing? The answer is we can't.
Okay, you cannot tell me what it's doing, but you can tell me what the code...
I can only tell you what the next... No, you can't. No, absolutely not. My God. In a very real sense, when they talk about these models having 7 billion parameters, 70 billion parameters, 570 billion parameters, they are the lines of code.
You can give me that.
You can, but you can make absolutely no sense of them.
No, but I can run the program again and ask them...
You can put an input in and recompute. And incidentally, while each computation can be... You can backpropagate the network to work out where they are. One of the most defining features of the mathematics that they use is a zeroing effect, which is that if the activation is below a threshold, you treat it as zero. So in other words, 99.9999% of the model is set to zero upon each inference step.
Like the brain.
Yes, it's sparse. And it's the property of sparseness that enables it to function as well as it does.
So
there's no simple model, because that sparsity is being defined completely on the basis of context. There's no simplification.
Maybe there's no simplification, but OpenAI got something that seems to work relatively well, right?
The Google paper 2017 was the recipe, but go on.
Wherever that knowledge came, we have something that seems to adapt to our needs. You ask ChatGPT to give you a list of good foods to eat with these certain components that you have in your kitchen, and it happens to work, right? We have that. So we have the observation, this works, or this seems to work. It's not perfect, but it seems to work somewhat. So we can replicate what led to that and have it more times, right?
Only by recopying all 70 billion parameters.
Yeah.
Well, you make that sound like easy peasy.
No, it might cost $1 trillion. I'm not I'm not talking about the scale of the project. It might require that.
It's pretty relevant.
It is relevant.
It makes the whole thing of imagining it a quasi-religious fiction.
It might be, but I'm just saying that it is feasible.
Well, yes, because God is feasible if you're willing to suspend enough observations.
But there's always room in our current economy to increase our investment somewhere by an order of magnitude or two. We aren't investing more than 10% of our economy in large language models. That is not the case now. It's much less than that. So we can still multiply by 10 what we're doing.
That's currently. I mean, it's been a long time. It's been 15 years since the most valuable company amongst the sort of top 5 companies there are within any industry section. It's been 15 years since that wasn't energy. It was energy 15 years ago, and since the last 15 years, it's been, tech. So actually, I think you'd really have to say that something big has happened there. I mean, the current stock market is estimated and read out to people in the form of indexes. The indexes are a weighted sum of a small collection of stocks. It's well understood that that weighting is heavily weighted towards tech right now, and that in fact you couldn't mathematically double the investment from here. No, you could not. It's not 10%, and therefore, because it's so much larger than, as it were, that fraction, it's unlikely that you could just freely flip it within an order of magnitude. Couldn't make it 10 times bigger.
Maybe you cannot 10 times Google, but you can 10 times OpenAI.
Well, OpenAI has got a strange way of valuing itself, and in fact, the underlying, if you want to look at it from an economic perspective, the underlying asset for OpenAI is the it's the classic thing. If you want to dig for gold, sell the shovels. It's the GPUs. So it's Nvidia, and Nvidia just overtook Apple as the 3 trillion most valuable company that we have. And so again, I'd have to say that there is a massive concentration of capital and interest in one area now, for which a times 10 change in behavior is now not possible. You couldn't go 10 times up from here. There isn't enough times.
There isn't enough capital in the
yes.
world.
You see, you gave the example of 10%.
Yeah.
Nothing should exceed 10%, because that means that if it's underneath 10%, you could multiply it by 10 and still fit under 100. Well, that rule's broken. Here, empirically, it's not 10% anymore. It's a sufficiently larger number for which this nice, elegant test of whether something's important, could you make it 10 times bigger? If you could, then it's not that important. And if you couldn't, then it's important. That test now is...
I wasn't saying it's important. I'm saying that potentially, let's say we lose suddenly everything breaks, but we would still have the blueprint of how to build it. Or the fact that we have so many engineers who were just working on it would allow us to build it faster than we did before. And that knowledge that we've gathered of how to do it, even if we don't know how the machine is working inside, we have knowledge of how to build a machine which we don't know how it works inside. So if you cannot make a model of the thing, you can build a meta model.
Oh, exactly. And that's exactly where I'm trying to score a point on you here, which is that activity is possible. But the activity of simplification and defining the model is not. It isn't. You could go about the activity, you could recompute it and redevelop it, but you can't capture it in a single simple model. You could only regenerate it. That's exactly where I'm coming from here. There's no simple model here at play.
Isn't all the talent...
There's no godlike rule.
Absolutely. There's no godlike rule. There's not something that you can do.
There's nothing you can put your finger on. There's nothing you can wake up in the morning and try to do.
But all the engineers are trying to nudge the variables in the direction of making the model better.
A very small number of engineers are succeeding in that, yes. A very large number of engineers are failing, such that their participation in the marketplace can be written down to zero.
But we seem to not be able to discern between them. But
oh no, we can do that too. I mean, that's why companies like OpenAI do attract such interest, because they have an HR framework that means that these small number of highly competent people are all within that brand.
You subsidize the bad performers so that the good ones stay. What?
That last part I didn't get.
This is kind of a up point, but so you're trying to claim that the bad performers are subsidized by the good ones.
Who's bad in this equation?
The engineers who are not actually pushing, they're not punching their weight.
They're just not able to contribute. I mean, that's okay. I mean, I'm not able to contribute. I mean, I still don't feel I should be, turned into, wafers to feed to the whatever. I mean, the reality of this particular tech is that there seems to only be around, a small number of people that are actually making any kind of contribution, and they are held firmly within what seems to be one brand right now.
How could we tie this down to entropy to finish off the episode?
That we appreciate that a simple model, you can develop descriptions of a simple model and capture that, but that description itself does not contribute in any way to your own success. It's just a fun side project. But in fact, the really day-to-day, moment-by-moment work is being done without the model, can live without the God. Humans can do their thing.
Again, this is where
global entropy doesn't exist. It's just the day-by-day humans that are getting and doing their thing. God is dead. We didn't need it.
We can build with tools that we don't understand fully.
Oh, I think the important thing that you would have to say about those people is that those small number of people in this particular game is that their understanding is very advanced. That's all. Yeah,
but not full.
Absolutely not full. Correct. They don't seem to seek it, and that would be where I'm jiving here. They're not seeking that. They go to work and they seem to make moment by moment decisions. See, some of them are quite in thrall of that. Right? They're sort of humiliated by that. They have lost looks on their faces when in interviews, which is that when someone asks, why is it that you can able to do this, they don't have a model, they don't have a God, they just have a bunch of neurons that make great decisions as they write their code.
So there's not a model you can build of the model of the thing.
Right.
The thing just is.
Yes.
And as you...
see, you're getting a bit mystical by saying it just is. It is for physics reasons. All of the parts go up and down and left and right in predictable, causative, complex ways. But that any kind of global summary is meaningless and makes no contribution to your being able to make any further progress. The progress is right down at the level of the physics. It's not at the level of the ideas. Of the overall idea. It's in the actions. It's in the physics.
And wouldn't that make superfluous the position of a manager?
Don't get me started on that.